Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Running Reimagined. For those of you that don't know, my name is Dylan Hopper. I come out with videos and Facebook Lives every single week to help give you a tip or a trick to improving and hopefully over time transforming your running experience. All right, so I'm so excited about today's Facebook Live. It's all going to be centered around kind of the do's and don'ts of interval training. I think interval training can be kind of a complex beast for a lot of runners who are maybe a little bit newer or don't have experience trying to write those workouts, and so they get a lot of questions of, the intensity. What intensity do I run? What recovery do I give myself? What distances do I run? Where do I run them at? Kind of all those questions. So hopefully today, based on kind of my quick overview, and then I have 5 tips that I think are really, really important and key to your interval training. So please let me know if you're here. Let me know in the comments below. Just before I get into it real quick, I would like to let you know that on the link above in this description of this Facebook Live, there is a free coaching call that you can sign up for. It's a free 20-minute coaching call with me. We can go over anything you want to running related. So feel free to take advantage of that. And then, yeah, so let me go to my computer. I got my computer right here, and I'm just going on to my Facebook Live. If you've enjoyed these Facebook Lives every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, please continue to like and share these videos. This is the way that people can know about it and it can benefit other people. Facebook algorithm doesn't show everybody. So, all right. So today, again, if you're just joining, is going to be all about interval training, kind of the do's and don'ts. Interval training can be very much a complex beast in terms of there's so much information out there, and yet it's one of those things that people can really struggle with, especially newer runners trying to put together workouts. So before I go into, I have 5 different tips today. I kind of have an overview of kind of what interval training looks like, kind of a few different do's and don'ts, and kind of the variability of interval training, and really how it's up to your imagination in terms of the workouts that you write for yourself. So what is interval training, first of all, for the newer runners, the beginner runners? Interval training is basically repetitions at a certain pace. So you're taking a repetition at a pretty fast effort or harder effort, and then you have a recovery repetition at, say, either a walking pace, it could be a jogging pace, it could be a standing recovery, but you're letting your heart rate come back down, and then you're going back into that fast interval again. And this could be done on a variety of different distances. You could be changing your distances. You could go and run either consistent. You could run K, so you could do 4 times 1K, which would be you're going to run 4 reps of 1 kilometer hard, and then you're going to take an easier recovery of, I don't know, let's just say 2 minutes. I don't know, that could be a lot of recovery depending on where you are, but that's kind of an example of what an interval workout could look like. It could also be a ladder, so you could build up, say, 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. You could build it up and have that be your hard repetitions and come down and do, say, equal recovery. Again, it's I think the most important thing is that you have fun with it. You have fun with writing the intervals, and that you're not so much just doing the same interval week after week, because a lot of times you can get really stale, not only physically but mentally as well. And so by just having fun and changing up the different intervals, there's a ton of different benefits that can come from that. Secondly, why do you do intervals? Intervals can be a great way to be able to get faster. So running the distance that you want to run, running your big PRs, intervals can be a really key component to being able to get there. The other reason is that intervals are mentally tough. Intervals can really push you as you go through those repetitions, as you get in those later reps. You go through a lot of those mental battles, so it can be great practice or preparation for that race, because as you get into the later portion of that race, you're going to go through those same mental battles. So if you can be able to conquer them in these intervals, it's going to help you on later down the road. And then kind of the last piece that I think it can help tremendously with is pacing. A lot of people think of intervals as a tool to get faster, which it is, but I think it's also a great tool for pacing. And so it's important to understand that just because it's interval training doesn't mean that you have to give a really, really hard effort. It's your effort level can be dependent on what you're trying to achieve. If it can be a great tool to learn how to pace. So maybe if you're just beginning in running, you don't need to go really, really hard. Maybe right now it's just about, good morning, Danielle. Hey, Derek. Right now it could just be about figuring out what pacing is. So if you're trying to run, say, a 5K, and that's your end goal, and you're trying to run it at a certain pace, you can be able to use these intervals. You can use real short intervals to allow your body to understand what that pace is. And then as you go through repetition of it, you're going to start to figure out what that feels like, not only at the beginning reps, but at the end reps as well. So it can be a tremendous tool for pacing. And then kind of some other overview tips. I wouldn't do intervals as a beginner runner more than once a week. When you're tapping into a little bit faster quality of running, you can expose yourself to a higher risk of injury. So I would only do, if you're a beginner runner, just do it maybe once a week, maybe once every 10, 13 days, depending on kind of the cycle that you're training on. And again, coaches can always help set this up for you. And then if you're maybe a more experienced runner, you can do intervals a couple times a week. Although it's really important to vary the intensity and the distance that you're running those, so then you're not leaving yourself exposed. Because at any time you increase your speed or that effort level, you're going to expose yourself to a little bit higher risk of injury. But with that comes the opportunity to be faster. So, and then the last piece of kind of overview that's really, really important in interval training is to make sure that you're getting a proper warm-up. So what this means to me and what this has meant to, I think, a lot of people who have practiced with intervals is to get a light run in. So that could be, depending on where you are, it could be a mile warm-up, it could be a half-mile warm-up, it could be a 2-mile warm-up, but it's just a really, really light run. Let your body get warmed up, and then go through some dynamic drills once you get in that light run. This could be going through like some lunges, this could be some leg swings, this could be some high knees, it could be some skips. There's a ton of different dynamic type drills that you can do to get yourself warmed up. And then the last piece I would make sure that you do is strides, and I've talked about strides many times before in these Facebook Lives, but I think strides are really important in setting the wheels for that interval workout. So make sure that you start those strides at an easier effort, and then you build into them. So maybe you do 4 strides, and the first stride is only going to be 50% effort, the next one's 60% effort, the next one's 70, and the next one's 80. So you're never really going 100%, but you're allowing your legs to turn over, and you're starting to get your body set and ready to do these intervals. So that's kind of a general overview of these intervals. Now I'm going to go into kind of my 5 tips that I think are really, really important for runners. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know either in the comments below or message me directly on the Running Reimagined page. You can also sign up for that free 20-minute call, and we can go back and forth, and I can give you specific interval workouts as well, depending on what race you're running for, because that's really what matters. So my first tip to interval work as you go through the process of learning it and doing it is to create a staple workout. So what does that mean? That means creating a workout that you're going to do maybe not week after week, but maybe every other week or every third week, you're going to repeat this workout as you go through your training. There's a couple different reasons that you want to do this. One, it's going to help build consistency in your training. Two, it's going to help you compare kind of where you are based on what you had done, say 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and you're going to be able to see that progression. And then two, you can be able to use this and say as you get more in shape, as you get closer to your goal race, you can be able to cut down the recovery, you can be able to maybe cut down the pace a little bit. You can start to measure those things out because you're doing a consistent workout. And then I think the last benefit that you get from having a staple workout is it allows your body and mind to start to get used to kind of a specific interval in which you can start to run consistent times. So if you're doing, say, kilometers, I'm just going to stick with that because that's what I started with. If you're doing kilometers, 1K repeats, what you can do by doing it over and over and over, you're going to start to get used to a certain pace per kilometer, which will translate to, say, you're in the US and you're trying to do it, miles, or time per mile. So you can be able to convert that and figure out what your pace needs to be. But you can start to get used to that pace, and then by getting used to that pace, it's going to allow you, when you get into the race, to understand that at the beginning what your body should feel like, because a lot of times people get into those first race efforts, and then all of a sudden just they're in the environment, there's the crowd, there's the loud dude on the loudspeaker, and they start to just kind of get excited, and a little bit of adrenaline starts pumping through their body, and then they say go, and they jump off the line, then all of a sudden you're running, say, a much faster pace than you would normally run. And what happens is then you pay for it in those later races. Intervals are very similar in terms of if you start out too fast, you're going to end up paying for it later. And so by doing a consistent staple workout from, say, week 1, then maybe you repeat it week 4, then week 7, then week 10, you can be able to really have your body adapt to those paces. So when you get into the race, you can be able to, understand, especially at the beginning, hey, this is the pace I'm supposed to run. My body knows it, my mind knows it, and I'm confident in what I'm doing. So that's kind of the benefit of doing a staple workout. My second tip in interval training is to be able to run consistent times or paces throughout the intervals, or a negative split. So I'm a huge fan of negative splitting, really setting yourself up for success. What does a negative split mean? A negative split is when you start out, say, at a time or a pace, and then as you go through your run or your intervals, you only get faster. You cut down your pace. So you're only getting quicker each interval you run. So you're going to run a faster time, say, for every K interval that you run. There's a lot of different benefits for this, and again, they kind of cross over a little bit into a couple of the things that I had talked about before. But if you're running your intervals and you're really inconsistent in terms of, say, maybe you run your first K interval at, say, 3:30, and then you run your next one at 3 minutes, and then you run your next one at 4 minutes, and then you run your next one at 3 minutes again. This inconsistency is going to translate into the race. All these things you're doing, not only are these intervals going to help get you physically in better shape, but they're going to help prepare you for the race. So you want to be able to train as if you would race, and the most efficient way to run your fastest time is going to be by running consistent intervals, or to be able to run faster intervals as you go. So I think it's really, really important that your training reflects the same way that you want to run the race. And so if you can be really, really disciplined in running if you can be really disciplined in running, maybe slower at the beginning, allowing yourself to run a little bit better at the end, or at least run consistent through the intervals, it's going to pay huge dividends later on once you actually get into your race. It's just an unbelievable habit to do. Another workout, and this is a side one that I always love, is progression runs, which you start out at a really, really slow pace, almost a warm-up or slower pace, and then by the time you finish your run, you're running pretty close to, say, like what your race pace is, but it's a really slow build-up over the course. I think that's another tremendous workout that you can do. Tip number 3, in terms of interval training, is to always be moving on the recovery. I'm a huge fan of making sure that you keep the blood flowing. I know it's really, really hard when you finish an interval. You're tired, you're exhausted, and a lot of times if you're really pushing those speed kind of barriers for what that means to you, you can really feel pretty crappy. You can be really, really tired. You can be hands on your knees, possibly throwing up, hopefully not pushing that hard, although I'm sure we've all been there before. But making sure that you're moving. So you finish that interval, and then I don't care even if you just keep walking, but as long as you're continuing to move. So you could have maybe your water bottle right next to you where you're going to finish that interval. You could have that. You could spray it in your mouth, but always be moving. When you stop, and if you stand still or if you sit down, you're allowing your muscles to kind of freeze up. And right now they're all warmed up, they're primed, and we want to allow your heart rate to drop, but we don't want to allow everything else to kind of tighten up. So it's really important to continue to move. So what you can do in terms of planning a workout is you can be able to say you finish your interval, and then on the recovery, you can make the recovery either a distance or a time, and you can just make it like a walk jog recovery, where maybe you start out walking and then you start to kind of jog again, and then when you start your interval, don't just start from a standing start, start from a rolling start. So that means jogging into it and then starting. We want to limit the risk of injury as much as possible, and so by rolling into it instead of just starting quick is going to allow you to kind of limit that risk a little bit. So that was tip number 3. Tip number 4 is to make sure, and this goes into choosing where you choose the intervals, make sure that there's no interruption in the interval. So choose a location where you're not going to have any interruptions. So this could be a track, this could be a field, this could be a trail that you know of that is a good consistent trail that you're not going to have maybe too many bikers on it or cars or anything else. Make sure that when you start your workout, there's nothing that's going to get in between you and finishing your workout. One example I was going to give, and this is again kind of making how variable intervals can be. A lot of people think of intervals and they'll just go to the track or maybe a really flat field, and that's great. But so one of the first colleges I had run at, our coach would do, especially as you prepare us for some of these cross-country 10Ks, he would take us to some trails, and he would have say a half-mile trail or a mile trail carved out, and within that repeat, there could be some elevation changes. So we could have a hill, and then we could be going down a hill, and then running. The one thing I would guard against that is, as you make sure that if you're going down the hill, that you're not heel striking and trying to pound all the way down. Make sure your gait is flowing through and making sure the hill isn't that steep. But it can be a great way, again, for that mental toughness. Because as you go through that interval, you can hit that point where all of a sudden you have that hill, and it's like that challenge, all right, let's do it. So it can be a great mental challenge as well, and it also adds variability, so then you're not just running such flat kind of, it could be, over time mentally boring. So it's a way you can add variability, and I wouldn't cut off or limit yourself from just running, or not running on trails, because I think if you can get a consistent loop, it can be a great interval, especially if you're doing trail type marathons or trail 10Ks or 5Ks. because then that's exactly what your race is going to be on. The one thing that you're not going to get if you do that is you're not going to be able to build. It's going to be much tougher to build the consistency in terms of understanding pacing, like we had talked about in some of the other tips, just because there's the difference in changes in elevation. But nonetheless, make sure that where you run these intervals, there's no interruptions between. You're putting in a really good, serious, hard effort. You want to make sure that nothing gets, nothing out of your power stops you from, finishing your workout or getting in between your intervals. And then my fifth tip, and I think this is crucial because this is going to help set you up for the next day and then also the next workouts, whether that could maybe have a tempo run scheduled or your long run scheduled. This last part is crucial to making sure that all of the work that you just did is going to be successful, because you're doing this work not only for now, but you're doing it, to help build you towards that end goal. And so this last tip, the fifth tip, is to make sure that you go through a proper cool down, and then also some kind of light stretching at the end, and then also maybe go into not right after the race, or the workout, but maybe a little bit later, do some icing. You can do some rolling out, whether that's with a foam roller or a softball or a golf ball, or I don't know. There's a ton of different rolling type tools that can be really inexpensive. There's a lacrosse ball. A lacrosse ball can be a great one. All these things, make sure that you're going through those preventative measures for injury, because doing that, especially doing like some rolling out, some stretching, and a proper cool down, you could do the same distance, or you could maybe even do a little bit longer distance than what you did your warm-up at, but just make sure that it's a really, really light effort. But yeah, so again, this is going to help make sure that you can do this interval training the next week, and then the next week, and the next week, as you build to become a faster runner. As I said before, anytime that you start to tap into, hey Robert, how you doing? Anytime you start to tap into those faster speeds, you're gonna kind of increase your chance of injury. So it's really, really important that you take care of your body afterwards. So that's kind of my 5 tips for you. Again, kind of going through a fast summary of what I had talked about earlier. For those of you that are just jumping on now, we're going over interval training, kind of the do's and don'ts of interval training, what it is, why you run them in the first place. My first tip to interval training was to create a staple interval or a staple workout where you're doing a consistent interval, a specific workout. You're going to repeat that workout, maybe not week after week, but every other week or every third week. This is going to allow you to be able to have something to compare yourself against. It's going to allow your body to get used to understanding what pacing is and the pace that you're trying to run. And then it's also going to allow kind of yourself to build confidence, because you're starting to see that progression as you go through. You can always change up the recovery that you give yourself, or maybe the pace that you're running at as you get more in shape. But it's a really, really great tool for building yourself up for that workout. Tip number 2 was make sure that you're running a consistent pace or time. And if you can, even negative split it, which means you start your first interval at say 3 minutes and 30 seconds, and you close and maybe finish your last interval at 3 minutes, setting yourself up for success. So that could be maybe starting out at a little bit slower pace on the first one, and then finishing at the pace that you want to. Or like I said before, running consistent paces. You are preparing yourself for that race, and your body's going to respond based on the preparation that you had done. So you want to be able to train yourself to running consistent paces. If you can really understand what pace you're trying to run, you can get into a race and you understand what that pace is supposed to feel like at the beginning versus the end. As you go through those Ks and those miles throughout the race, you're going to understand what that pace should feel like. So when you get in that race environment, you're not all hyped up just because of the crowd and just the overall environment of the announcer and everything. People get all hyped up about it. So just by running consistent intervals, you're going to understand how fast you're supposed to be running at the beginning, because just like in intervals, if you start out too fast in intervals, you're going to pay for it later. Tip number 3 was to always be moving on the recovery. I think this is a really important tip. I think there's a lot of people that can finish an interval and then they just stop or they sit down. And standing recovery is a type of recovery, but at least be walking around. So you might have your water bottle right where you're finished, so you can grab it, you can spray it in your mouth, maybe take a sip, but then continue to at least be walking around, or plan on jogging really, really light after you finish. And then always make sure that you don't start the interval from a standstill. Make sure that you jog into it. Make sure it's a rolling start. You don't want to just jump into it, because we're trying to limit as much as we can that risk of injury. Tip number 4 was make sure there's no interruptions in your workout. You're putting in a hard effort. It's really important that, as long as anything that's within your control, make sure that you can control the environment in terms of making sure that there's not going to be bikers that are going to get in your way, traffic lights, cars. So make sure that you do it at a location that will allow no interruptions throughout your workout. And then tip number 5 is to make sure that you're taking the injury preventative measures that you need to allow yourself to continue to do this week in and week out. Not only this run, but then also maybe your long run, maybe you have a tempo later that week. Take care of your body now, because that's going to eventually, that can build up of the consistent training is what's going to lead to your PRs. So that's making sure that you're cooling down properly. That could be the same distance that you had run for your warm-up. It could be maybe even running a little bit longer, but running a really, really light pace, just allowing your body to cool down. Then maybe doing some light stretching, some foam rolling, or some rolling on either like a golf ball or a softball. And then maybe doing an ice bath later, or an Epsom salt bath, or just taking those preventative measures. So those are kind of the 5 tips that I have for you. Feel free to message me if you have any questions, or if you want me to write you a specific workout. Again, you can always schedule. There's a free 20-minute call that's going on all the way up to the new year. And so you can feel free to set up a call and we can talk back and forth about your specific situation, because the distance that you're running and the times are really dependent on what your goals are. But I'd love to talk with you, so feel free to sign up, and then we can go back and forth, and I can write some specific workouts for you that you can try out. Maybe I can write a staple workout for you that you can use as you build up for, say, your first half marathon or your first 5K or 10K or whatever it is. So that's what I have for you today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. We're live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so we'll be live again on Wednesday. So have a great day, guys, and take care.